What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3. It is Sunday, November 10th, 2024, coming to you from Long Beach, California, to break down another win for the number one ranked Oregon Ducks as Oregon takes care of Maryland 39-18 Saturday night in Eugene to move to 10-0 for the first time since 2012 and just the third time in program history. And joining me to break all of it down is ScoopDuck owner and publisher Justin Hopkins. J-Hop, how are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. Yeah, I think I'm better than some Duck fans that seem really upset at last night's result. But there is nothing better than being 10-0 and moving on. And got a nice little Sunday. I'm gonna get ready and go get some lunch here after we get done.
There you go. Sounds pretty solid. I'm going to be working the phones trying to catch up with some of the recruits that made the trip out to Eugene this weekend. Definitely a couple of big names. So make sure you guys stay tuned in to scoopduck.com for all the latest. And you can come and chat with us on our really active message board to just kind of join the discussion around Oregon football and recruiting with all of our Duck fans over there. So Justin, yeah, you mentioned it. That was certainly the tone or the vibe coming out of this game on Saturday was Oregon won by 3 scores, 21 points. But the resounding feeling among the fan base and to some degree myself was that certainly wasn't Oregon's best game. Certainly some sloppy play, primarily on offense, but you also saw, I think, some penalties popping up on both sides of the ball that fans have not been accustomed to this year. So there's a lot that we can get into here. Where do you kind of want to start?
I mean, like, there's just so much about it. I would say you hit the nail on the head. I think I'll start there. Penalties, right? Inexcusable. That's just a lack of focus, a lack of discipline. And I don't think this team has that week in and week out, but they did yesterday, right? It feels like to me they came in, I don't want to say underprepared, but just lacking, excitement, lacking that focus that's kind of needed to maybe put away an opponent like this. Of course, they put them away, right? We know that. But let's be fair. I know that the Ducks put some points on the board, but the defense is really what stole the show for Oregon. I mean, the performance the defense gave, particularly in the second half, especially in the fourth quarter where they were completely dominant. That was, but that's a thing, right? That's like, we could talk about the defense and you look at pretty much any great team of the past and they play either really good to great defense. Like, the worst is that they play pretty good defense. They typically play great defense, and Oregon plays great defense. I think we know that the offense can get going, and when they do, it's obviously a great compliment. But to me, I think the biggest thing was I think what encapsulates the feeling of the game was the fact that 12 penalties. Oregon had
12 penalties for 95 yards.
12 penalties, and so that's just inexcusable. I mean, I think if Dan Lanning was sitting here and being objective about it, he'd say, "Hey, we got to fix that. That's not right," and it's not. You can get away with those against a Maryland. Those are the types of things that cost you a game against an Ohio State or an Indiana or Texas or whatever the case might be, which is obviously something we have to think about here in the next few weeks.
And that's the thing about it, Justin. That frame of mind, that thinking, it's not just because of where we are in the season. Oregon could have had this game 6 weeks ago, and I'd still be saying the same thing because that's what you're striving for, the postseason, to be on the same field as those top 5, top 3, whatever teams at that point in the season later on in the year. So that was really strange to just see Oregon play probably its sloppiest game of the year. Maybe it's sloppiest since the Idaho or Boise State games earlier on that were just really uncharacteristic, and you don't come to expect those with how the Ducks have been playing in recent weeks, but you got it done. For me, I was really, really, really impressed with the defensive line play. Like, oh my God, that was really fun to watch. I think between all of the guys along the D line, they had 6 pass breakups, which was just tremendous because they had only 2 sacks on the night, but we knew that Billy Edwards Jr. was going to get rid of the ball really quickly. I think that the broadcast crew said that he has the slowest snap to release time among all Big Ten quarterbacks. So this is a guy who wants to get the ball out get it to his receivers, and move on. So credit to the defensive line to realize that, and not that you're giving up on your pass rush, but just to have the awareness to put a paw up and knock the ball down was great. And then obviously Jordan Birch had probably the strongest game among the defensive linemen. He had the strip sack fumble of Edwards that was scooped up and returned by Brandon Johnson. I know you were talking about it after the Michigan game, Justin. Didn't quite feel like he was 100%, but Birch sure looked like he was 100% last night until he kind of got banged up a little bit. And Dan Lanning said in the post game that he just tweaked his ankle a little bit and he thinks he's all right. But we didn't see much of Birch in the second half.
Yeah, didn't see much of him after he went out with that. Like I said, you're watching it live. Obviously, they didn't give away anything. It didn't look bad. It wasn't like, oh man, gosh, but it looked like somebody that had played hard for, 3/4 of a game or whatever you want to call it, and got nicked up, and it happens. And then I think if you're Dan Lanning, you kind of look at, the guys you have and the fact that that's a very valuable piece to your team. And you feel pretty good. Like, hey, let's ice you down the rest of the game. Let's get these other guys out there and get this thing back in the locker room and be done. So I think it's the right call. I think that obviously they did the same thing with Jordan James as well. Only saw him with the one carry in the second half. And again, like you said in the post game, Lanning basically said, mostly precautionary, probably could have played him if we needed to. And that's the beauty of having depth on your team first and foremost, B, being in a position in the game to be able to do that. And, just kind of knowing that, hey, I trust our guys, whether it's Noah Whittington in that case, or it's Mateo or somebody else stepping up for Birch, knowing that those guys are gonna be able to fill in. So love all that. Solid win. Move on. Got to keep in mind. I got to say this because I'll forget. Maryland just came off a bye, so you gave a team with an explosive offense and a coach that kind of knows the other coaches a little bit, 2 weeks to prepare. Basically, you got to keep in mind that was Maryland's Super Bowl, right? Maryland's Super Bowl was having a chance to beat Oregon, and you had an extra week to prepare for them. And they did a good job. Like, I'm not going to take away anything. They did a pretty good job, especially on the defensive side of the ball for them, taking away the deep shots and kind of keeping it. They did a good job of limiting explosive plays on Oregon's offense so that they could remain in the game, right? It never really felt like the game was in doubt. It's just that the game didn't get so far away that they had no shot of getting back into it, right? And I think if you're Mike Locksley and you're on the road and you're playing the number one team, that's a pretty good blueprint. I think he did a good job. And so you got to keep in mind, guess what? Wisconsin didn't play a football game this weekend. So
now they're off a bye too.
They're coming off a bye. So they're, for 2 weeks, what's Wisconsin got? Their Super Bowl is having a chance at beating Oregon this coming weekend as the Duck come and visit. And then guess who doesn't play next weekend, right? Obviously Oregon, but Washington, So then Washington's going to have those 2 weeks. And we know Washington's Super Bowl, no matter what, is going to be having any shot at all of either putting, Oregon's first loss or knocking them out of number one or whatever is going on at that time. That is Washington's season right there, is having a chance to play Oregon. So just remember, you're going to get these guys the best shot. They've got 2 weeks to prepare. And, that does make a difference. And what we saw here is even with that time and a pretty solid game plan, that's how much better Oregon was than Maryland, was that they could still win by 21 on what we'll just call a kind of average performance.
I like what you said there, Justin, about Maryland's approach and how they kind of limited the explosive plays for Oregon and just did a good job of keeping everything in front of them. I think you could also hear the Duck fans that said that was a pretty conservative game for Will Stein from a play calling standpoint. Just look up some of the numbers here that I have in front of me. Oregon's longest run of the night was 36 yards. Keep in mind, that was from Jordan Birch on a fake punt. That was phenomenal. I tweeted it out. I was like, man, I don't think it's going to happen, but what if he breaks this one? Just unbelievable athleticism there, a la Casey Rogers from last year, who tweeted after, oh, hey, this play looks familiar. And then Dylan Gabriel's longest pass of the night was 26 yards. So it's not like the Ducks didn't have the personnel to really open things up and have some more explosive plays, but for whatever reason, they didn't, and they didn't need it as well. So I'll be honest and tell you it wasn't the most entertaining Oregon game that I've ever covered, but that they still did plenty to get the job done. Noah Whittington was the leading rusher with 13 carries to Jordan James's 7. And Whittington had 77 yards on the night. Just one rushing touchdown for the Ducks. That was Jordan James, who had a long of 10 on the night. But the Ducks still finished with 180 yards and 5.8 yards per carry, which, Justin, I think is a testament to the offensive line, who were without Marcus Harper for the first time this year. I think that how you're able to run the ball is a great testament to just what you're able to do as an offense overall, with Kavika Rogers and Dave Iuli kind of switching in and out throughout the game. But it seems like Rogers got the bulk of the snaps there. So Dylan Gabriel also wasn't sacked. That's another positive to draw from last night's game. And then just Dylan Gabriel's final stat line, 23 for 34 with 183 yards and 3 touchdowns. So not the best game for the Oregon offense by any means, but you weren't sacked. You were able to move the ball. That's great. I continue to look be more and more impressed by Justice Lowe, who caught 4 of his 6 targets for 30 yards. That was another thing that kind of stuck out to me, was the drops early on in that game. Incredibly uncharacteristic of Oregon, but again, amid all of that, they were still able to come away with a good win. So it makes sense to criticize them, critique them for not playing their best game, but at the same time, you got to realize where they're at. They're the number 1 team in the country. They're 10-0. And they just beat an opponent coming off of a bye week, to your point, by 3 scores.
Well, and I think, you speak of the Terrence Ferguson drops. I was sitting there watching the game like, bro, come on. You know what I mean? Like, that's a veteran guy. Those were some bad drops. And I'm not pinpointing any one thing on Ferguson. I just think that kind of encapsulates some of the team's sluggishness last night, between the penalties and those drops and just some other things that kind of went on during the game. They kind of sleptwalked. They weren't focused. They weren't, it wasn't like they were against Michigan. And it's tough. I get it. These are still college kids. And if you're Dan Lanning, you're trying to motivate them each week. You're trying to block out the noise. I mean, I get the FIBU and all that, but you're really naive to think that these kids don't see social media, don't see the AP polls, don't see the college football rankings, aren't watching their friends play at Georgia or Florida or whatever before their games. Like, that's happening. I mean, that's just the way it goes. And so, I did say this was in my Sunday thoughts, and I feel like I'm being negative, and I don't want to be, because if that's Oregon's floor, a 21 point win over a conference opponent, then the team's in pretty good shape, right? That feels like that's Oregon's floor. And so we've seen them play a little closer to the ceiling, with some bigger wins and bigger quarters and better offensive output against, Michigan and others prior to this game. So best thing from this game is not just the win. Like, 10-0 is great, wins great, whatever. Everything's good. For the most part, seems like stayed relatively healthy. The best thing is, I think Dan Lanning can and will use this game to keep motivation going. You are going to have the opportunity, if you're Lanning, to go in on Monday and have a team meeting or whatever and be like, guys, we did not play well. Like, we didn't execute. We had penalties. We had drop passes. We did not play well. And you'll use that as motivation, because normally that speech comes from a loss. Mm-hmm. And this is still a 21-point win. So I think that this game, beyond just the win, has a ton of value for, Dan Lanning to be able to go like, guys, we can't do that. Wisconsin's going to come out and come after us. Washington's going to come out and come after us. We have got to figure out a way to stay ready and hit the ground running. So, I think there's a ton of value from this game. And I think it's like a blessing in disguise, right? Having kind of that little slip up. I did also include in that article 2 years ago, remember, Oregon played Georgia, opened the season against Georgia. Pretty sure we remember the result of that game, right? They kicked the shit out of Oregon. Bad. Lanning's first game, blew Oregon out. And then you go and you watch Georgia that year go on to win a national championship. Looked like one of the best teams we've seen in a while, right? Not just this year, that year, whatever. That looked like one of the most complete teams we've seen in a while. And you go back to that 12-0 regular season for them. They had a 4-point win over Missouri, who was unranked. And they had it was like a 10-point win over Kentucky, which again was unranked. And that was like, the 10-point win was like 16-6 or something, like just 2 games that were not very good. And still, that was a Georgia team that went to go 12-0 and absolutely just decapitate TCU in the national championship. These kind of games happens, even to really good teams. Win, move on, keep it going.
And you hit on, I think, a broader point for Oregon this season, and I feel like you could write story on story about this, but just the challenge that Dan Lanning has of keeping his players motivated and locked in and showing up for every single game. We're seeing the Ducks versus them, and we're getting a great glimpse into how that works. But that we can't overstate how important, and also I think how difficult it is to do that. Like, you can have all the best players in the country and still have your guys just not show up. Maybe they're all over social media and reading their own press clippings and thinking they're the best thing since sliced bread. All of those things, but Lanning has been able to tap into something. Maybe we didn't see as much of it yesterday as we're used to, but he's been able to tap into something within his players, within his staff, and just the level of connection and cohesion, and just, for lack of a better phrase, how locked in he has his guys is something that has been really, really impressive to me. And I don't think that we should lose sight of that in what was still kind of an ugly-ish win, or one that you kind of see the offense maybe sleepwalking through things a little bit, getting bailed out by the defense at times. But that was just something that came to mind for me, because I think for any head coach, much less a young head coach like Lanning, I think that there is tremendous value in that, and he is doing a hell of a job in that department.
Yeah, and it's really easy to forget. I've even, I just kind of thought about it this morning. Oregon's had a long string of games in a row, right? They had a very early bye. Obviously, we know they play Wisconsin this coming weekend. Then they have what is going to be an absolutely much welcomed bye in 2 weeks. And so, you look at a lot of there's no perfect way to do a bye, but Oregon had a very early bye, has played, what is it, 8 games in a row, I believe, since that bye without a break. That's, physical fatigue. That's mental fatigue. That's, we're talking about the dog days of summer. Well, this is the dog days of fall, of early winter. And that's where Oregon is. So, I mean, that bye being the second to last week, that's going to be good. Like, that'll be a good thing. But that stretch from that first bye to this one has been a really long stretch. These guys are tired. They're dinged up. They're practicing. They still have school to do. They have lives outside. They have family to worry about, things happening in their personal lives. Like, it's just hard to remember to stay perfect. And that's one of the things about college football that's different than NFL, right? NFL, these guys are showing up, and that's just their job. They show up and practice, and they go home, and that's it. These guys still got school to do. They still, have other obligations. And so, a little different ball game. And it's, as you know, it's really tough. There's only 4 FBS teams that are still 4-0. And you look at those 4 teams, right? Army, had Army had the second biggest win of the undefeateds, and it was 10 points, I believe, 10 or 11 over North Texas. You had BYU with the 1-point win over Utah. And I did write there, quote unquote, they might have gotten a little help in that game. Who knows? That was an interesting game, but that was a 1-point win for BYU to stay perfect. And then, obviously Miami lost. They're no longer perfect. And then Indiana was a 5-point win over Michigan. I think it was 15-20. So, I mean, if you look at the unbeatens, and there's 4 left.
15-20.
Yeah, 15, 5-point. Oregon had the biggest win margin with a conference opponent to remain unbeaten. So that's where it's at, man. Everybody is fighting to stay perfect. All these games are tough. There's no doubt Utah played the hell out of BYU because that was kind of their Super Bowl. It was the Holy War, which is a big game, but a chance to knock them off from being unbeaten. It's just Indiana, Michigan. I think Michigan actually played a pretty good football game. They still struggle putting points up on the board, which makes it really difficult. But that was a full 4-quarter 5-point win for Indiana. So that's just where we're at. It's really important to keep that stuff in context.
No doubt. And before we get too far in the show, want to make sure you guys have a reminder to check out Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Not sure what your dinner plans are tonight, but head on over to Ranchito at 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. Try out their homemade tortillas. They got great food, a great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to my guy Ruben and let him know that Max Torres sent you. Max Torres and Justin Hopkins of ScoopDuck.com coming at you on a Sunday afternoon. By the time you guys are listening to this, breaking down Oregon's 39-18 win over the Maryland Terrapins in Eugene. Justin, we've talked a lot about the offense. Maybe we can talk a little bit more on the defense before we wrap up today's show. I spoke earlier about how impressed I was by the play of Oregon's defensive line. But a couple other notes that we can mention here. Tyshim Johnson got his third interception of the season. Justin Jacobs got an interception as well. And I think Justin Jacobs' role has been one of the more surprising developments for Oregon this year, because I don't think he's a bad player. I don't think he forgot how to play, anything like that. But he's a guy that you brought in from the transfer portal from Iowa, expecting to be a main pillar of your defense. Missed about half the season last year. Then he looked like he was pretty solid. But at this point in the season, it seems like he has really become a rotational piece, and maybe not someone that you see start each and every week. They play every week, but maybe not a bulk of snaps. Maybe he's not the linebacker that they have at the top of their depth chart. And while surprising, I don't think that's a bad thing, because you have Jeffrey Bassa, Devin Jackson, Bryce Betcher also in that room. And I was just, that was kind of a little note that I had from yesterday. Like, did Justin's interception change the game? Not necessarily, but I think that was good for him to get, just to kind of keep building that confidence, feel a significant part of that defense, and just to continue stacking momentum and creating takeaways. That's a huge thing that I've been wanting to see from this Oregon defense. I wrote about it leading up to this week's game, and they did that. So good for Justin to grab one yesterday.
Yeah, he really feels like a role player at this point, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? We've seen, Amari and Winston come in and be used situationally. I mean, Oregon will do that. I mean, that was, kind of Blake Purchase last year was more of a situational guy, and to have a guy like Jacobs maybe being in a role like that is pretty indicative of how much talent is on this team, right? That's a guy that would probably start at darn near every other Big Ten school, maybe save Ohio State, Michigan, and maybe Penn State. Those are the only three. He's just there's a player there. I don't know if it's confidence, and maybe his body still kind of suffering the lingering effects of some of those injuries, just maybe not being comfortable in this role. Or it could be all of those things combined with the fact that Devin Jackson has clearly emerged and gotten to be a much better football player. Bryce Betcher has emerged and is no longer, to me, it was like, oh, that's okay. He's just a walk-on. It's like, I don't view that guy as a walk-on. Yeah, dude, that guy's out there giving it. So great problem to have, right? You're looking at a room that was probably a little light on depth, and now we look at it and say, well, shoot, maybe Justin Jacobs is the fourth best linebacker in that group, which is, maybe a bit of a slight to him, but also a credit to those other guys for getting better and improving and being developed at Oregon. And that's kind of the name of the game. So he's been a real interesting case study. I think it's a great point. I think that was a great point that he got that pick yesterday, and it was a great pick. It wasn't like he just stood there and it got thrown to him. He made a heck of a dive there to get that ball and secure that football. That was a really good interception by Jacobs. So, maybe it's a guy that just we see carve out a little bigger role down the stretch here, because like you said, and I agree with, there's still a football player in there. That guy didn't forget how to play linebacker.
So for me, I think as we exit this Maryland week and start to turn the attention over to the Wisconsin Badgers, another one of those true Big Ten road trips for the Ducks. I think for me, I want to see execution from this Oregon team, but more than anything, I want to see consistency. I don't want to see these slow starts, which haven't been characteristic of Oregon, but that's what we saw yesterday. And then they won the third quarter, but it wasn't pretty, and they had to pull out some trick plays to kind of get out of that funk. Shout out to Janoris Wilson and Josh Connerly for some big man scoring last night, by the way. But that's really what I want to see. Like that is the second to last, at least for Oregon, the second to last regular season game. So I don't know. I think I just have a hard time balancing, hey, survive in advance versus what's up with this team in the third quarter And is it something they're going to get over, or is it just something that's the reality, and you're going to have to deal with that come postseason? Like, I don't know. I would give anything in the world to be a fly on the wall in that staff meeting, just to understand how they view it and what the plan of attack is for it. Because I don't know if it's just you're using too much juice early in the game, or if you're getting complacent to some degree. It's just shocking because Oregon is really well coached and they have a bunch of really good players. So I don't know how we're still talking about this in early to mid-November. It's surprising.
Yeah, it is an area of weakness, and it's an area that Dan Lanning has to identify and get better. I mean, they came out after half. Fortunately, they were able to score there before halftime because it was kind of looking like, like Oregon was fine, but it wasn't great. And they kind of go and score, and you're like, okay, so then they scored, and they're getting the football after half. Well, they get the football after half, they go 3-and-out. Like, just
did nothing with it.
Yeah, 3 straight up dud plays where just nothing came from it. And I mean, let's be honest. If it wasn't for the special teams and the Jordan Burch, to me, that's a clear signal that Dan Lanning sees what we're talking about. I mean, you don't do that unless you kind of like, man, once again, we came out in the third more flat. I need to do something. And so, I mean, brilliant call. Way to have your kind of like your finger on the pulse and to kind of identify like, hey, this is a great opportunity to do this, and this might give us a spark. And it did. But again, it took a trick special teams play. The offense, for whatever reason, has got to come out of the tunnel at half. I don't know if they go in the locker room and just take a power nap and don't wake up from it, or what the case is. They got to come out. You can get away with it against Maryland. Obviously, you can get away with it against Michigan and some of these others. But when it gets down to it, if you do see Ohio State again in a few weeks, it could be costly. If you obviously get in the playoffs or the bowl game or whatever Oregon ends up doing, that can't happen. So and neither can 12 penalties. So those are areas that Dan Lanning has got to fix. And I mean, to be quite honest, we look at this Wisconsin game. We're not going to talk about it much here, but again, Oregon's going to be heavily favored. I don't even need to be a Vegas insider to guess that it's going to be 20 points or more, right? Oregon will be favored on the road, 20 points or more. So they should walk in and win, but these things need to be cleaned up. I don't care if Oregon wins by 20 or 30, covers the spread or any of that. I just want to see a clean game, less penalties, a little bit of life in the third quarter, and just see them execute in all phases. That's all it takes.
That's what we want to see next week. And Justin and I will have plenty more to say about that Wisconsin game in our next episode and throughout the week. But that's going to do it for us here on our Sunday edition, our Maryland Reaction Pod. If you want to find more of Justin, you can follow him on Twitter/X at JHopkinsSD. Find me anywhere at Torres Sports. Like the video and subscribe to the ScoopDuck on 3 YouTube channel. We're on the road to 2K, and we are getting there rapidly thanks to support from you guys, from our every episode listeners. But it's been great. It's been a fun season. Make sure to check us out at ScoopDuck.com and sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. So it's a lot of stuff going on, and we will see you guys in the next episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.